You have done this before. Not the specific event, not the exact person, not this particular version of the story, but the shape of it. The same kind of relationship, ending the same kind of way, the same kind of job, becoming unbearable for the same kind of reason, the same kind of argument, somehow always arriving at the same accusation, no matter who is sitting across from you this time. Most people standing in the wreckage of the same mistake for the third or fourth or 10th time reach for the same explanation: bad luck, wrong timing, the wrong people, again and again, by unfortunate coincidence. And it is a comforting explanation because it asks nothing of you. Luck is external. Luck has no address inside your own mind for you to go looking. But luck does not have a memory. Luck does not know your specific triggers, your specific blind spots, your specific way of choosing exactly the person who will hurt you in exactly the familiar way. A pattern that precise is not bad luck. A pattern that precise is being run by something with a memory. And it is not the part of you that is doing the choosing on purpose. Carl Jung spent much of his life studying this exact phenomenon, and he gave the responsible party a name: the shadow. Not evil, not literally dark, simply the parts of yourself that were pushed out of conscious awareness so early and so thoroughly that you no longer recognize them as yours. And here is the unsettling part of Jung's discovery. What gets pushed out of awareness does not disappear. It goes underground, and from underground it keeps steering. This is not a video about self-improvement in the way that phrase usually gets used. This is about something quieter and much harder to see directly. The part of you that has been writing the same story on your behalf for years, using a version of your own handwriting so convincing that you mistook it every single time for choice. To understand why a pattern can repeat with such precision, you have to understand what the shadow actually is and where it comes from. Every child arrives in the world with the full range of human capacity: anger, need, selfishness, sexuality, ambition, rage, all of it. But no family, however loving, can make room for the full range. Certain qualities get met with warmth and encouragement. Others get met with disapproval, punishment, or simply silence. Jung's insight was that the qualities met with rejection do not vanish from the child. They go into hiding, forming a kind of second self that operates entirely outside conscious awareness, the shadow. Here is the mechanism that creates repetition. What goes into the shadow does not become weaker for being hidden. If anything, it becomes stronger because it never gets exposed to reality, correction, or growth. It simply waits, fully formed, for situations that will let it express itself indirectly, since it is no longer allowed to express itself directly. This is why the pattern so often shows up as a type of person you keep choosing, or a type of situation you keep recreating. If a child learns early that anger is unacceptable, the adult version of that child may unconsciously seek out partners who provide plenty of legitimate reasons to be angry, not because they enjoy conflict, but because it is the only socially acceptable channel left for a feeling that was never allowed a direct outlet. Sigmund Freud, working from a different angle, describes something closely related: the compulsion to repeat. He observed that people often recreate painful situations from their past, not out of masochism, but because the unconscious mind is attempting again and again to finally get right what went wrong the first time, even though the attempt almost never succeeds. And the situation almost always ends the same way it did originally. The particular cruelty of this mechanism is that it feels from the inside exactly like free choice. No one consciously decides to marry the same unavailable partner 3 times in a row, or to sabotage the same kind of opportunity every time it arrives. It feels each time like this one is different. It rarely is, not because fate is unkind, but because the same unexamined material is doing the choosing every time, dressed in a new face. Consider a person who grew up in a household where showing need of any kind was met with quiet disapproval, not cruelty, simply a subtle withdrawal whenever vulnerability appeared. That child does not stop needing things. The need goes into the shadow, hidden even from the person's own awareness. As an adult, this person may find themselves repeatedly drawn to relationships with people who cannot quite meet them emotionally, not because they enjoy being unmet, but because a relationship with someone reliably present would require exposing the exiled need directly, and some part of the psyche still remembers that exposure as dangerous. The unavailable partner is not chosen despite the unmet need. In a strange way, they are chosen because of it, since they guarantee the need stays safely unexpressed. This is also why the pattern can survive so many rounds of conscious effort to do things differently. A person can read every book on healthy relationships, learn every principle of communication, and still find themselves 3 attempts later standing in the same room with the same feeling. That is because the shadow does not operate at the level where books and principles live. It operates underneath, in exactly the territory that was sealed off before language even arrived to describe it. Here is the part of the mechanism that makes the shadow almost impossible to see directly. It does not appear to you as your own material. It appears to you as something entirely outside yourself, usually as something intensely irritating or threatening about somebody else. Jung called this projection, and it is one of the most reliable psychological processes ever documented. The qualities you have most thoroughly rejected in yourself do not stay contained. They get unconsciously assigned to the people around you, and you experience them as belonging entirely to that other person, with startling emotional intensity. This is why certain kinds of criticism land with disproportionate force. If someone calls you forgetful and you barely register it, that is because forgetfulness is not shadow material for you. It is simply a fact you can shrug off. But if someone calls you selfish and something in your chest ignites immediately, far past what the comment actually warranted, that disproportion is the signal. Jung's rule of thumb was precise. Whatever triggers an intense, immediate, almost irrational reaction in you is very likely pointing at your own shadow, not simply describing a flaw in the other person. This explains why the same type of person keeps appearing across a person's life, seemingly by coincidence. The controlling boss, the dishonest friend, the needy partner. It is tempting to conclude that the world is simply full of controlling, dishonest, needy people, and that you have had uniquely bad luck running into them. But Jung's model suggests something more precise and more useful. You are highly attuned to detecting in other people the exact qualities you have exiled in yourself, because some part of you is always scanning for them. Karen Horney's work on interpersonal patterns adds a further layer here. She observed that people often recreate in adult relationships, dynamics they could not resolve in childhood, unconsciously selecting partners or situations that echo the original unfinished business, not to suffer needlessly, but because some part of the psyche keeps hoping this time will be the time it finally gets resolved. The mechanism becomes self-sealing. Because the shadow material feels like it belongs entirely to someone else, you rarely think to look inward. You simply conclude, once again, that you have had bad luck with people, while the actual author of the pattern remains completely unexamined, safely hidden behind the very drama it just created. Notice how this plays out in something as ordinary as watching someone else receive praise. If a person has exiled their own ambition, believing early on that wanting recognition was shameful or arrogant, they may find themselves reacting to a colleague's success with an intensity that seems disproportionate even to them. A flash of contempt, a private thought that the colleague is showing off, seeking attention, full of themselves. None of this is really about the colleague. It is the exiled ambition glimpsed briefly in someone else's success, generating exactly the kind of disapproval this person once learned to aim at their own wanting. The cost of an unexamined shadow rarely presents itself as a single dramatic loss. It shows up as a slow, repeating tax on a person's entire life, one that is easy to misattribute to circumstance. The first cost is energy. Maintaining the split between the acceptable self and the exiled shadow requires constant, largely unconscious effort, a kind of psychological labour spent keeping certain feelings, impulses and truths locked out of awareness. This labour produces a specific kind of exhaustion that has no obvious external cause, the tiredness of holding a door shut against something that never stops pushing. The second cost is intimacy, since projection places your own disowned qualities onto the people around you. Close relationships often become distorted without either person realizing why. A partner criticized relentlessly for being controlling may, in reality, be a completely ordinary partner who has simply become the temporary screen for someone else's exiled need for control. The relationship suffers for reasons that were never actually about the relationship at all. The third cost is the most corrosive because it operates over the longest time scale. The repetition itself. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality, but the shadow inverts this cruelly. It ensures that certain painful realities repeat themselves again and again, precisely because the underlying material was never brought into consciousness where it could finally be examined, understood, and integrated rather than endlessly acted out. There is a particular quiet devastation that tends to surface only after the pattern has repeated enough times to become undeniable. After the third failed relationship that ended the identical way, or the fourth job that became unbearable for what turns out to be the exact same reason. A specific, uncomfortable thought can surface in that moment. What if the common denominator in all of these situations was never actually bad luck? What if it was me, in a way I have never once been given the tools to see clearly? That thought is not an accusation. It is the first genuinely useful piece of information a person shaped by an unexamined shadow will have received in years, because it finally points the investigation in a direction where something can actually be done. There is a particular scene that plays out for many people at exactly this point, often while sitting alone, reviewing the wreckage of a familiar situation, for what feels like the last time it should ever have to happen. A journal, a late night conversation with a friend, or simply a long, quiet drive becomes the setting for laying out the pattern honestly for the first time, not to assign blame, but simply to see the shape of it clearly. And in that moment, the shape is often startlingly easy to see, once looked at directly, in a way it never was, while living inside any single instance of it. There is often a specific disorienting moment when the pattern finally becomes visible as a pattern, rather than as a string of unrelated bad luck. It tends to arrive quietly, often while looking back at several situations, laid side by side for the first time. Not one painful memory, but 3 or 4, viewed together, their shared shape suddenly impossible to unsee. The common denominator was never the other people. It was the consistent, unexamined presence of the same person in every single one of these stories. You. Jung insisted that this realization, uncomfortable as it is, represents genuine progress rather than failure. He wrote that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. Recognizing your own shadow's fingerprints across years of repeated patterns is not the discovery that you are broken. It is the discovery that the story has an author after all, and that the author can eventually learn to write something different. If any part of this felt uncomfortably familiar, you are not alone in it. This channel exists to sit with exactly these kinds of quiet, unspoken psychological patterns. The ones that repeat silently in the background of a life until someone finally has a name for them. If that is the kind of exploration you are drawn to, consider staying. There is more of this ahead, including a closer look at how projection specifically shows up in the people who irritate you most, and what actually happens when the shadow finally gets integrated rather than avoided. There is no simple technique to offer here that dissolves years of unexamined material in a single sitting. But naming the pattern is not nothing. It is, in fact, the only step that was never available to you before. If this reached something in you, say so in the comments, specifically if you're willing. Which pattern in your own life this made you think of? And if you know someone who has been blaming bad luck for a pattern that has followed them for years, this might be the first time anyone has ever handed them a different way to look at it.